He was the smiling man next door, friendly, hardworking, and always ready to help. A businessman, a community leader, and on weekends, a clown who made children laugh. But beneath that bright costume and painted smile, John Wayne Gacy was hiding one of the darkest secrets in American history. For years, his neighbors thought nothing of the strange smell coming from his house, or the boys who entered and never came out. What they didn't know was that the clown from their block, Pogo the Clown, was burying bodies in the crawl space beneath his home. This is the chilling story of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown who hid his victims beneath his home. John Wayne Gacy Jr. was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. His childhood looked normal from the outside, but behind closed doors it was filled with violence and fear. His father, an auto mechanic, drank heavily and beat him often. Nothing Gacy did ever seemed to please him. When Gacy helped his mother with housework, his father mocked him, calling him sissy. Those humiliations sank deep, shaping a boy who grew up desperate for approval and control. In his teenage years, Gacy struggled with his health. He fainted frequently and spent long periods in bed recovering from mysterious blackouts. Teachers described him as polite but quiet, a little withdrawn. He was desperate to be liked, a pattern that would follow him for the rest of his life. After a troubled youth, Gacy moved to Las Vegas, briefly working as an ambulance driver and then at a funeral home, where he slept in a cot behind the embalming room. He later admitted that one night, curiosity drew him to climb into a coffin with a deceased teenage boy, running his hands over the body. He claimed it frightened him so badly that he fled back to Chicago the next day. But something had already shifted inside him, a darkness that would only grow stronger. By the mid-1960s, Gacy married and settled in Iowa. He opened a small chain of KFC restaurants and quickly became active in the community, even joining the local JC's, a young businessmen's organization. He appeared charismatic, charming, and helpful. But beneath that image, his old impulses resurfaced. In 1968, Gacy was convicted of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison but served only 18 months before being paroled for good behavior. He returned to Chicago, determined to rebuild his life and restore his reputation. He remarried, started a construction company called PDM Contractors, and bought a modest house at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in the suburb of Norwood Park. From the outside, it looked like the picture of suburban success, a tidy home with a small garden and a flagpole out front. Inside, however, the foundation of horror was already being laid. Gacy quickly became involved in local politics again, hosting neighborhood cookouts and parades. He loved attention and the feeling of importance. And then came Pogo the Clown, his weekend alter ego. Dressed in a red and white costume with oversized shoes and face paint, Gacy performed at hospitals, children's parties, and charity events. He often said, "Clowns can get away with anything." That line would become a dark prophecy. In the early 1970s, young men began disappearing around Chicago. Most were runaways or drifters. Some were teenagers hitchhiking to a new life. Others were local boys just trying to earn a little extra money. The disappearances were scattered, random, almost invisible against the noise of a growing city. And yet, many of those missing had one thing in common. At some point, they crossed paths with John Wayne Gacy. He offered them jobs in his construction business. "Good pay for easy work," he said. He picked them up at bus stops, gas stations, and convenience stores. He promised opportunity, money, or simply a safe place to stay. But once inside his house, the atmosphere changed. Gacy had a trick he called the handcuff game. He would show his guests a pair of cuffs, pretending it was part of a magic act, a trick to escape. He'd cuff himself first, demonstrating how he could easily unlock them with a hidden key. Then he'd invite his victim to try. Once the cuffs clicked around their wrists, the tone shifted. Gacy would lean close and whisper, "The trick is, you have to have the key." Then came the rope, his so-called rope trick, a loop placed around the victim's neck, twisted with a wooden stick until they stopped struggling. Some were buried that night, others stored temporarily in closets or beneath floorboards. Gacy worked methodically, always returning to his ordinary life as if nothing had happened. Neighbors noticed an odor seeping from his home, especially in the humid Chicago summers. Gacy told them it was a plumbing issue or dead rats in the crawl space. He even invited friends to help him spread lime and dig trenches beneath the house, claiming he was fixing the drainage. They had no idea they were digging graves. By 1978, the number of missing young men in the area had quietly risen. Parents filed reports that often went nowhere. Police assumed the boys had run away. Few connected the dots until one name changed everything: Robert Piest. Robert was 15, a shy and responsible teenager working at a pharmacy in Des Plaines. On the evening of December 11, 1978, Robert told his mother he was stepping outside to speak with a contractor about a possible job. "I'll be right back," he said. He never returned. When Robert failed to come home that night, his mother reported him missing immediately. Detectives began asking questions and quickly discovered that the contractor he'd gone to meet was John Wayne Gacy. Gacy denied meeting Robert, claiming he'd been busy elsewhere, but investigators noticed inconsistencies in his story and requested a background check. When they learned about his prior conviction for sexual assault, they decided to dig deeper. 2 days later, police obtained a search warrant for his home. They combed through the rooms, the garage, and the crawl space. They found odd things: handcuffs, a police badge, pornography, and a high school ring belonging to another missing boy, but nothing that directly tied him to murder. Still, the smell under the house unsettled the officers. Gacy laughed it off, insisting it was just moldy ground. As the investigation continued, detectives placed him under constant surveillance. They followed him to diners, bars, and late-night drives. He seemed to know he was being watched, sometimes buying coffee for the officers trailing him, but the pressure began to show. He drank heavily, ranted to friends that his life was over, and eventually started hinting at the truth. On December 21st, after days of erratic behavior, police finally arrested him for the disappearance of Robert Piest. That night, inside the interrogation room, Gacy broke down. He confessed not to one murder, but to dozens. Calmly, almost proudly, he recounted how he had buried 20-something bodies beneath his house, adding, "I lost count. It got to be too much work." Detectives sat in stunned silence. The next morning, excavation began under Gacy's home. The first shovel struck something soft: human remains. Then another and another. The stench of death filled the air. Officers wore masks, but nothing could block the smell. The crawl space, barely 3 feet high, was packed with bodies. As word spread, reporters and neighbors crowded the street. Television cameras filmed as police carried out body bags one after another. Forensic teams worked around the clock in freezing December weather, counting the dead. 29 bodies were found beneath the house. 4 more were recovered from the Des Plaines River, where Gacy had dumped them after running out of space. The youngest victim was just 14 years old, the oldest 21. When asked why he did it, Gacy replied coldly, "They were worthless to society." He spoke about the killings as if they were a chore, something to get through before dinner. The trial began on February 6, 1980, and drew massive public attention. Gacy's defense team argued insanity, claiming he suffered from multiple personality disorder. They introduced the idea of Jack Hanley, a supposed alter ego responsible for the murders. But the prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: photographs, personal items, and Gacy's own detailed confession. They described a man who planned his crimes carefully, burying victims layer by layer, even pouring concrete to mask the smell. Witnesses testified about his mood swings, his temper, and his bizarre behavior as Pogo the Clown. Jurors saw pictures of Gacy smiling in his clown makeup and then photos of the crawl space. The shocking contrast between the performer and the predator. After 5 weeks of testimony, it took the jury only 2 hours to reach a verdict: guilty on all 33 counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to death, stating, "The acts of this man are unspeakable. The only just punishment is execution." As the killer clown case dominated headlines, the public's fascination grew. People couldn't comprehend how a man who entertained children could also be one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. Parents feared letting their children near costumed performers. The image of a clown, once innocent and joyful, was forever tainted. Gacy became both monster and celebrity. From his cell on death row, he gave interviews, painted clowns, and sold his artwork through dealers. Some buyers saw the paintings as morbid collectibles. Others saw them as an insult to the victims. Families of the murdered protested the sales, calling them blood money. Gacy, meanwhile, remained unrepentant. He denied responsibility, accused police of framing him, and even mocked his victims. When asked how he wanted to be remembered, he smirked and said, "As the guy who beat the system." He would not beat it. On May 10, 1994, after 14 years on death row, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. Witnesses described him as expressionless. His final words were short and vulgar, "Kiss my ass." As the chemicals entered his veins, his chest rose, then stilled. At 12:58 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Outside the prison, crowds of people celebrated. Some cheered, some danced, others simply stood in silence, holding photos of the boys who never came home. Even after his death, mysteries lingered. For years, several of Gacy's victims remained unidentified. Advances in DNA testing have since given names to some of those lost, but a few still remain unknown, buried once beneath his home, now lying in graves marked only as John Doe. Some investigators have long suspected that Gacy didn't act entirely alone. His crimes required planning, disposal, and constant deception. Could others have helped him? Could he have taught others his methods? There's no proof, but the question still haunts those who studied the case. And what about his mind? How could a man so ordinary in appearance, so involved in his community, harbor such unimaginable cruelty? Psychologists describe him as a classic sociopath, manipulative, narcissistic, incapable of empathy. He thrived on power and secrecy. When he painted, he often drew clowns with dual faces, one smiling, one grimacing, as if confessing that both sides were always there. The legacy of John Wayne Gacy is one of horror, but also of revelation. His crimes forced America to look closely at its assumptions about evil. It wasn't always the stranger in the dark alley. Sometimes it was the neighbor who waved every morning, the man hosting a barbecue, the clown hired to make your child laugh. His story reshaped criminal profiling and investigative methods. Police departments began improving record-keeping for missing persons and cross-referencing disappearances more carefully. The Gacy case taught law enforcement that predators could blend seamlessly into society. The house at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue was demolished in 1979. A new home stands there today, bearing no trace of what happened. The address number was even changed, as if to erase the memory. But for many, that ground will always be sacred, a graveyard disguised as a neighborhood lawn. For the families of the victims, the pain never truly faded. Some of them still gather to remember the boys, their laughter, their dreams, their stolen futures. To them, the story isn't about the killer clown. It's about the sons who never came home. John Wayne Gacy's story is not only about murder, it's about deception, about the mask that evil can wear. He wasn't a shadowy figure hiding in the dark. He was a man who looked like everyone else. A man who smiled, who volunteered, who shook hands with politicians and dressed as a clown for children. That's what makes his story so terrifying. It forces us to confront a question we rarely dare to ask. How well do we really know the people around us? How many smiles hide something darker beneath the surface? Perhaps that's why the story of John Wayne Gacy still haunts us. Because it reminds us that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear a painted smile. And sometimes they live right next door. This is Crimes Unknown, where cold cases refuse to stay buried. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more haunting mysteries. And don't forget to like the video to support real crime stories that deserve to be heard. Drop your theories in the comments.